Yes, indeed. I am late. Roger's here. Ethan, you know Roger. And because we're in the process now of getting our ducks in the row for repaving the parking lot, and our sewer line runs under the parking lot, and we don't have a clean out for 180 feet. We want to put a clean out in the middle of the parking lot. We want to do that before we repave it so that when it's all done, it's all nice. And that means plumbers. So Raj and I just out there talking to plumbers. But today on this live stream, I have the distinguished guest from the popular channel Navigating Patterns that has been pestering me for a very long time to talk about third way or third wayism. I'm not exactly sure what we're going to talk about, but I am sure I have been annoying Mark by not understanding the points that he's been desperately trying to make to me. And so today we will have Mark explain to me this whole third way thing. I've got some of my own ideas about third way things, but we will, Mark and we're going to get down to the bottom of it today, aren't we, Mark?
I hope so. I hope I can make this clear enough to you and everybody else, but
okay.
It hasn't worked so far, so let's not get our hopes up.
All right. You want me to talk about my third way ideas, or maybe you'll just hear from you?
Well, why don't you first talk about soft slope versus hard slope, which is where all this comes from, and then we can go from there.
So one of the things that I talked about a long time ago was sort of two evangelism strategies. And what I found was that a number of people, we'll use two high profile ones, let's say Tom Holland and Douglas Murray. Tom Holland and Douglas Murray, on one hand, want to see a robust, countercultural, weird Christianity that feels like something worth living for, something worth dying for. And so, even this Tucker Carlson quote that's going around right now, people love, sometimes I'll call it hardlining. People love that. It's inspirational. They feel enthused by it. They want to follow a hardliner. And I actually, if I have time this afternoon to make a video for Homeroom tomorrow, I might make one on this. But at the same time, and in fact, I was just reading let's do a little bit of screen. Through the miracle of screen. If someone who really wants to colonize me, I'll tell you the secrets. The way to really colonize me would be, there you go. Here, I'm giving the secret sauce. I'm giving it away for nothing here. Would be if you look at my blog and you take a look at the kinds of things that I am paying attention to. Because if I find something that I want to pay attention to, it goes on my blog so that I can find it easily later. So Steve Skojec he's on Twitter. You can find him on Twitter. I first found Cale Zeldin by something that Cale had written on a blog on a website that Steve was running. He was a trad Catholic, and he has deconstructed, and he's got a Substack, which is, oh darn, why won't you? There we go. He's got a Substack, and he deconstructed from the Catholic faith, and you'll find him on Twitter giving sort of new atheist arguments sometimes on Twitter. But I don't hold that against him. And he was just kind of writing a whole bunch of stuff in his life, and life is complicated, and he's struggling with stuff, and he's very open and honest and transparent about it. And so Steve, on one hand, was sort of occupying a space like trad Catholics that are very steep slope. Deny yourself, take up your cross, follow me, muscular, countercultural Christianity. This is what we need. And then he deconstructs. And, basically by writing all of this stuff, you also kind of get the sense of, pastorally, I read this and say, okay, go gently, because he's sort of responding to steep slope. And, someone like Douglas Murray has within him sort of the sort of antithesis of, I'm not going to pay any attention to a Christianity that isn't robust, muscular, and countercultural. At the same time, often you'll find these guys sort of on a gentle slope Christianity. They're going to let's say they're going to an Anglo-Catholic Anglican service. You've got a woman priest. It might be fairly inclusive, accepting, tolerant, all that. And so on one hand, you want to say, hey, wait a minute. I pegged you. You make all the noises like a steep sloper, and you live a gentle slope. And so as a pastor, you learn to sort of navigate these things with people because they go back and forth. And this sort of maps onto all sorts of other things going on in terms of the winsome wars, where there's a whole bunch of people out there that are just sick and tired of sycophantish pastors who are quivering masses of availability, just looking to put all of that little therapeutic molasses in. And they're like, no, I want hard lines. I want black and white. I want yes or no. I want live or die. But they go to a church that allows them to sort of creep in and listen and stay on the fence. So that's steep slope, gentle slope. And Mark has always said, well, we got to talk about third wayism. And I'm never quite sure what he means by that. So today we get the big reveal about Mark's answer to this question, and we'll talk about it.
Yeah.
Eric, Father Eric says, I am a solid, grumpy mass of availability. There you go, Eric. And,
nice.
And I feel that way too sometimes.
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, a lot of the message that you were putting out before about that was like Andrew Tate versus, going to a kind church that'll just kind of let you hang out and not really pressure you at all, right? And it's that, and maybe those are extremes, but like that's how you contrast things. So people
and given the fact now, Mark and I have been talking for a long time. I made my channel, and Mark actually went down to the Billy Graham library. These Billy Graham libraries, sort of like a presidential library. It's a library, but it's really a museum, and it's kind of a shrine.
Well, and yeah, there's magic in them there parts. And actually, technically, I went up because it's north of me. But yes, and that was entirely your fault. I still blame you for all of that.
That's right. And Mark, I do see that. I don't know how Father Eric on Sunday afternoon manages to live stream. I look at that and it's like, after church on Sunday, about the last thing I would want to do is live stream. and Mark is a regular on Father Eric's live stream, and Mark, has some deep family connections to the Catholic Church. And unless Mark, you're going to tell me differently, you're still between Father Eric and I, we haven't managed to corral you into a church yet.
Not yet. Nope. And I do the church when I do go to church, because I go with a friend of mine at her church, and I watch her get baptized. It's an Orthodox church. So, everybody confused.
That steep slope, Orthodoxy, steep slope.
Right. So, but I think, and this is, my whole thing is framing, right? Like,
okay.
The framing makes a big difference. So when you say something like deconstruct, I go, I've never heard a deconstruction story in my life. When you start asking people about their deconstruction story, it sounds more like, I'm driving down the highway, I'm doing about 100 miles an hour in my sort of old broken down car, but it's running, it's all cool. And I hit a wall, boom, and then bang. And now
I think we can agree that deconstruction isn't a great word, but it's become the code word for people walking away from the faith for all the usual reasons.
No, absolutely. Or not just, they usually aren't walking away. They think everything's fine. And then suddenly there's a wall in front of them. And the reason why I don't like the word deconstruction is because it's too individualistic and agentic and indicates that you did this. But when I hear the stories, it's nothing they did other than the sin of acedia, right? Not paying attention and suddenly they hit a wall. And the problem is that once the car is in pieces, and let's just assume all the pieces could be assembled together, you didn't take them apart. You can't reassemble them. And that's why I don't like that framing, because it gives people more credit for their own situation than they actually had, and doesn't allow them to to come back into a right relationship, if you will, with not only what happened to them, but the way out. Because the way out is not them putting the car back together with whatever tools they had in the trunk. That's not what people describe when they describe what happened after their quote deconstruction. They don't describe picking up a wrench and fixing everything themselves. That's not what they describe. So, and I understand the use of language is tricky and all that, but look, navigating patterns is about cultural cognitive grammar. It's the one thing that I took the most seriously from John Vervaeke's work, right? And I'm trying to help reframe things. And I think that's what Peterson does that everyone's missing. And I understand that you view Peterson as a revival. And I can see why, because from a Christian perspective, that's the best fit, right? It's the best explanation. And then everybody wants to kind of figure out how this crazy scientific, deeply secular, deeply uncommitted, real fence-sitting guy is leading people to a place. And, you know, you've talked before about, well, I see him lead people to a place, and then I know that there's a stopping point to that, and that there's a gap, right? And so you've talked about that before, but nobody's really talking about what it is that he does. And I have a couple of videos. In fact, one of my Peterson videos, his trick has 1,000 views now. So I've got one video with 1,000 views. Finally, I'm very happy about that.
Let's find this video.
Let's find this video on
you go to
navigating patterns.
youtube.com and you type in navigating patterns. Looks right there at the top of
right
my
there at the top where it should
list. And then let's see, videos. Well, let's look at so videos and the popular. Let's go to popular, and
there it
Jordan
is.
Peterson. Oh, look at that! It's got a good thumbnail. You know, nicely done, Mark. Nicely. Oh, Sam Harris, most holy.
That was my second most popular video. Yeah.
And Manuel Game B third. There we go. All right.
Yeah.
All right.
And Catherine, we got Catherine on there on the intimacy crisis. That's
Catherine on the intimacy crisis.
Yeah.
So, okay. So here's navigating patterns, and you can watch these for free on the internet at a website called YouTube. That's YOUTUBE
or Odyssey.
.com.
Or Rumble. I'm on Odyssey, Rumble, and YouTube now. So
hey, Mark, if I can't get them to YouTube, Odyssey, and Rumble, they're never going to get there. It's so funny. I was talking to my sister yesterday, and her channel, my sister has a channel on like house decor, and her majority audience are basically the kind of people I have in my church, like 70 and 80-year-old women. All these smart TVs now, when you bring up like YouTube on your smart TV, they'll start with a preview screen and they'll actually start playing the sound, but they only play it for 2 minutes. So she's got a lot of comments from the ladies in her audience saying, your sound cuts out after 2 minutes. And my sister's like, why are they getting these? I say, Ruth, they all have smart TVs and they all have preview mode, and they're all watching it in the preview, not knowing they have to click on it. And then you get to hear the whole thing. So anyway, just you know, making sure everybody understands how to watch navigating patterns on that site on the World Wide Web called YouTube. Okay, now I've delayed enough. Now we will find out.
Thank you.
The trick.
So I think what Peterson's actually doing is more wrapped up in staying very close to the secular material scientific frame that traps everybody, right? And I've talked with Father Eric. I did talk with Father Eric on this crisis of faith versus meaning crisis stuff, which I think is pivotal to sort of understanding this, because there's actually two groups of people involved. And so the case I want to propose to you is that you can look at the biblical series from Peterson and you can say, look at how popular it is. And it is slightly more popular than Maps of Meaning. That is true, unless you aggregate the Maps of Meaning numbers, which I think is a fair move. Now,
what do you mean unless you aggregate the Maps of Meaning numbers?
He's got 3 Maps of Meanings.
Oh,
so if you start aggregating those numbers up, right? Now let's just imagine, let's suppose, for example, that the Christians have an upper hand as a group, because not Christian is not a group. It's an identification against obviously.
Are Christians a group?
Yeah, like atheism is not like there's nothing you're rallying around with atheism. You're just identifying against something.
Atheists are rallying against Christianity. You don't have atheists without Christianity.
Right, but it's
Prove me wrong.
But it's an identification against. It's not an identification for anything. And
True.
that's actually an important fact. It's one of the Manuel's Post's great insights that he can talk much more eloquently on than I can.
Yeah, and I owe him. I owe him a talk too. I know. Him. I owe a lot of people a lot of things.
He didn't reach out to you, so I did.
He did reach out to me, and so he's probably going to be angry that because it was like, I probably have time for a live stream today. I'll just hop on with Mark. We'll get this thing done. So sorry,
This is good. This is good. No, so when you think about it, if there's more Christians, they're going to gravitate towards the biblical series. But what if you subtract out the Maps of Meaning people? Now the biblical series isn't quite as popular. And I don't want to make this is all speculation, prediction, right? But I think the bunch of people came into the biblical series from Maps of Meaning, right? From the draw from Peterson, whether it be Kathy
definitely,
Newman, right?
Definitely.
Right. Well, so you've got these inflated numbers from the crisis of faith people being added to the meaning crisis people.
Okay, right? Let's slow down on the crisis of faith people. Who do you mean? Describe that for me a little bit.
Those are your deconstructed Christians. And maybe others, but definitely. And look, I mean, I'll make the case that, yeah, you can have a crisis of faith and slide into the meaning crisis. But the meaning crisis, the crisis of faith are very different things, because in one case, you had religion and you know somewhat what you're missing, right? But also you have framework and wording that you don't have from a meaning crisis. I mean, to me, this is why John Vervaeke, who I love, makes up a bunch of words and then misunderstands non-theism and is shocked to learn that the church fathers some of them were non-theists. How could this be? It's like, you didn't understand non-theism. It's not that hard. It's just that, you for whatever reason, even though he did have that background, maybe it was too fundamentalist or something, he never engaged with those words in the same way. And so you have a gap in vocabulary, but it's not really a gap in vocabulary. It's a gap in understanding, right? So if you don't have the right starting point, the right starting axioms, it's a problem to get people into the church, for example, right? You're
okay,
not.
Let me slow that down a little bit. Part of the reason people are having difficulty getting into the church is because of their axioms. A presuppositionalist like myself will have absolutely no problem with that. If you don't have those presuppositions, it's difficult to get into the church.
Right. And those presuppositions are not mere presuppositions, right? They're not mere propositions that you can hand to somebody, because they don't necessarily have the concepts behind them. And I'm going to do it. I'm going to throw you a curveball. I think it'll be a curveball even to you. I somehow
now let me slow you down a little bit more now here too, because it's really easy to say the sentence, they don't have the concepts behind them.
Right.
It's far harder to know what that sentence means.
Right. Well, let me exemplify that with one pointer that is my curveball. Okay. I stumbled across a video by Ken Ham, of all people, the Ark Encounter guy. And for some reason, I actually
Mark is a Ken Ham mole in the middle of this little corner the whole time.
He's got a video called "Why Gen Z is Much Different from Previous Generations," which is quite good, although his framing's wrong and his solution is completely off the rails, in my opinion. But here's the funny part. He talks about middle out thinking. And he doesn't use that term, but he uses a little graphic to demonstrate middle out thinking. And I'm like, well, that's interesting. That's exactly what I'm talking about with middle out thinking. And he talks about the big road, the big Roman looking road, and there's this little road that goes across it, right? And on one end there's a cross, and you can't bring people from the road to the cross. You got to bring them back to the creation. And I'm like, yes, exactly. Yes, absolutely true, Ken. You're right about that. The rest of it, I don't think you're right about, and how to do that. But
okay, now again, you just threw out another term, middle out thinking. You're going to have to define that, because
well,
there's a fierce conversation going on in the comment section. Topic? Neither do I. Googling fiercely.
Right. Well. So what? Why would that be important? Because when you try to talk to somebody about where they're starting from. Like why do you think that, say, AI is going to take over the world? Where are you starting from? What's your definition of artificial general intelligence? And it turns out they don't have one.
Right.
They're actually not starting from anywhere.
Right.
Right. John Vervaeke did that AI thing, and I actually listened to it, and I'm like absolutely blown away by there's technical errors all over it. There's just wacky statements. I'm like, holy mackerel, John, what are you doing? These statements are out there, but he never defines his terms. And that's because that would require standing somewhere and starting somewhere important. And that's what's missing. This is Ken Ham's point. Like, if you don't start from creation, you don't understand what you're embedded in. You don't understand what you're beholden to. You don't really get the fact that you didn't begin, like Sam Harris sort of begins when he became conscious. He's like, oh yeah, the world begins when you become conscious. It's like, what? No, before you
kind
were
of a
conscious,
crazy idea for Sam Harris, this materialist.
Well, and it's ironic because Peterson's still very materialistic, but one of the things he does is he uses the materialism to break down materialism and show you, well, materialism ends here. Materialism doesn't explain this, right? And he uses history to take you back. And at the same time, he's talking about the importance of story, right? He's breaking down the Lion King and Pinocchio and showing you, I love the part when he starts the Pinocchio thing. He goes, "Why do you like this? Why would you even watch this?" And it's like, well, there's a good starting point, because that's the start of watching something. Is what drew you to that thing? Is that material? Because it's a cartoon about a wooden boy who comes to like none of it makes, when you start propositionalizing it, putting it into those propositional terms, none of it makes any sense at all. Like, what are you doing? And even if you did, why would it make any sense? What is it about that story that you're relating to? That's a good question, right? But that's the limit. So then he shows you that you do relate to it, right? Despite the mystery, one might call it, if one were Christian oriented, despite the mystery of why you'd ever engage, and the mystery of why once you engaged, you keep with the story, and then the mystery of you don't even know what you got out of that story, because at the end of the day, that's what he tells you. Like, you have no idea what you've been exposed to in that story.
And then what Jordan does is, people have sort of this vague faith in psychology. And so this is why, there's a correspondence here going. He does, he basically shows some correspondence between the Pinocchio story and some ideas that people have that, oh, I act out this stuff called psychology. And so then suddenly they draw a connection, because almost all meaning making is connecting two things, usually a story to something a little bit more tangible, and or a reason or something like that. And then suddenly people have a little epiphany. Oh, well, this is why I have to fix up my relationship with my father. And so then they begin to have, and you just look at the title of his book, A Map of Meaning.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and the psychology is the materialist statement about how your brain works or something.
Yes.
So there's the material.
As one of Ayman's mentors said, just like there's Islam in the Middle East, there's psychology in the West. And that's a very penetrating statement.
Yeah. So he's using history and psychology and talking about these stories and how they affect you, right?
Yep.
And then he's bringing you back, and then he touches on Jung, and he touches on Jung's psychology, I would say a tiny amount, because there's a lot there to absorb, right? He mentions Freud a few times and gives him a bunch of credit, credit where credit is due. A lot of, everybody talks about what Freud got wrong, and not all the stuff Freud got right. It's a lot of stuff that he did that is definitely useful and correct. And then he starts talking about Jung in terms of prophecy, not in terms of psychology. And then he does the same for Nietzsche. I don't think he ever mentions Nietzsche's philosophy. I don't think he mentions any philosophy from Nietzsche at all. he mentions the prophecy that God is dead and all that. He mentions the prophecy, but not. So now we got two prophets in the picture, and we're going through history backwards. And then we get, basically, he takes us all the way back to ancient Egypt, right? And there's some detours along the way to go all the way back to Marduk and Sumer and the real ancient first civilization stuff from the Fertile Crescent and all that, right? But he settles in Egypt, and it may be like, well, why does he settle in Egypt? He settles in Egypt because that's the intersection of history in the Bible. And then you transfer it into the Bible. You've already set the groundwork because you've already said, look at stories. They're doing something for you.
You've jumped, and it's helpful to remember that in America, you will have credibility via science. You hear it all the time. Buzzwords are holy words.
Right.
No, this is science. Oh, this is science. I must be true. This is science. And so he has this credibility as a psychologist. I mean, in many ways, I'll talk a little bit about the church fashion that sort of bridged Billy Graham into the mega church, and that was the seeker church, where what seeker churches would do is they would all the sermons would be like from Proverbs. And so they would use wisdom that you'd find in Proverbs, and wisdom in Proverbs is, it's general revelation. You note patterns in the world, and they'd say basically we'd establish credibility with wisdom, and we'd tell them about Jesus, and we'd give them a community to wrap around, and we'd give them some courses about how to manage their finances better and how to make their marriage better and how to parent their children better. And we'd do this to suburbanites in the suburbs, and very quickly they would become Christians, and off we would go. In a similar way, Peterson begins with psychology, and people are like, oh, I can kind of see why I hate my boss because I had issues with my daddy. And they gain a little bit of credibility, but then he, of course, like you say, he goes back to Egypt, and then he, starts talking about the Bible, and said basically people look at each other, and if someone is credible in their eyes, they'll say, oh, well, if Jordan Peterson is finding things in the Bible to make him a better person, maybe I'll look in the Bible to make me a better person. Of course, then Peugeot comes along, and they run the whole route.
Well, exactly. And I would say that part of the difference between what, say, Peterson does and what an evangelist does, an evangelist is front of you, trying to save you using a personal connected story. Now, if you don't have the framing of stories being anything other than a postmodern random interpretation of, random interpretation from anybody, and the framing that, I can interpret Moby Dick as a treaty on gender, which is hopefully absurd to everybody. If not, it should be. That's kind of dumb. But if you don't have the framing that, no, these stories aren't arbitrary. Some of these stories work better than others, and some resonate better than others,
right,
and some are more important than others. If you don't have that, the personal evangelization isn't going to work. And what Peterson does is he doesn't do the get in there and do this and go to these things and have a 12-hour Easter or whatever the Orthodox do. But he also doesn't just let you in and go, why don't you come in and check it out and smell and see if you like the place.
He doesn't have any place for people to go to besides his YouTube channel, and now maybe some of these other little things.
Right. But what he does do, which I think everybody's missing, is he's actually not inviting people to be saved. He's inviting you into participating in saving the world without using any of that language.
Very true.
Clean your room.
He sometimes does that. I mean, if you listen to enough of him, he will put those pieces together and say, just like Bill Hybels said, the hope of the world is the church. For Jordan Peterson, the hope of the world is an individual who's put their life together. That's the hope of the world, because your society is built on that.
Right. But that's not how he draws them in. He draws them in by giving them, you can clean your room. And then maybe you can attend to your family and make that. And then maybe you can attend to your community, right? And so but what he's doing in that step is he's first, before he's trying to invite somebody into a personal relationship with, Jesus on a stick or whatever, he's saying, I just love Jesus on a stick. I came up with it. And I can't get it out of my head. He's saying, you are an agent in the world. You have an ability to change the conditions around you.
Right.
Because until you do that, all the, oh, by the way, you can have a personal relationship with this guy and everything's going to get better. It doesn't make any sense at all, especially not in a world where you're the interpreter of all frames, because postmodernism says so. That's not going to fly. But Peterson doesn't send that message. He gives you that way to engage by restoring your agency first.
Yes. And I think that, so Raj, who, for a hot moment was the hot girl in this little corner, because after I talked to him, everybody wanted a piece of Raj. But that, and when Raj first came into our local estuary, that's the first thing he said. Basically what Jordan Peterson did for people was give them, especially for young men, for whom all of these big messages was just sort of kept taking away their agency. Jordan came in and said, you have agency, clean your room. And truth be told, on the ground, some people already were quite agentic and they heard this, and this was confirmation of what they knew. So they really got into it. Another group of people were sort of on the bubble. All they needed was a little bit more of a push, and then they could clean their room and they could start straightening out their life. And so they could get some momentum. And then there's a third group of people that we don't talk about who heard this, tried it, stumbled, and just basically wandered back into their morass.
Right.
And they're still out there too.
Yeah.
But
so
go ahead.
So that's the third wayism with the soft slope. He's not just setting the bar low. He's instantiating struggle, and he's talking, from my perspective, Manuel, of course, he's talking very much about the God number one, your God number one and God number two, right? But he's never talking in those terms, which I think is fantastic.
Well,
then that's the agentic part that you were talking about. And so he's
I don't understand your nomenclature, third wayism. Third way between gentle slope and soft. What? So it's another way. So can you distill?
Yes, I will try.
What you mean by, because in some ways, and I'll just show. So I don't know. Yesterday, this thing came on. Grizz was talking about it. Someone else from the corner came by, and it's like, oh, guess what? Matthew McConaughey, he's stepping into the Oprah space. And he has this list of Super Soul Sunday. No, it's not Super Soul Sunday. It's some join the road trip for, well, look at this. Only 3 payments of $150. That's something John Van Donk probably has to learn, except our conference is cheaper. But so, and they have ladies in pink. We'll have to tell Catherine she has to wear pink. But, so in a, part of the reason I stepped into this space was I knew that, Matthew McConaughey coming in and a lady in pink and Tony Robbins and someone with a whiteboard, there's a long established pattern in America of people their lives aren't going well. And then they turn on and then they click and then it's like, oh,
self-help.
And off they go, but it doesn't go real far because
it's individualistic.
Right.
It's
and what people actually need, and this is what churches have always known, what people actually need is a healthy community around them. And in fact, not just a healthy community, but a community with a bias towards sacrificial service. Because the truth is, what I've seen in evangelism in church, most of the philosophical stuff for most people, not all, doesn't matter. I've seen this again and again. Someone's making a mess of their life. They drive by, they see a church, somebody walks out of church, they got a smile on their face, and that person's like, I'll try that. And they go in, and maybe the pastor has a good message that day. And they roll out basically a standard evangelical message, and then the people hear that, and they're like, I want to do something. And then maybe it's an altar call type church, and they go to the front. Suddenly they're getting a lot of attention, and suddenly they've got some people around them that are going to call them up the next day and say, how are you doing? Well, my cat just made a mess on the floor. Okay, well, I'll come over and I'll help you clean up the cat mess, and then we're going to go to church. And it's actually that community and that walking next to people step by step by step that brings the transformation. And as cults have shown, you can have the wackiest ideas in the world and it doesn't matter, because people need love and they're suckers for community. But over the very long haul, the actual quality of the community is what's really going to matter.
Right. So the difference between the soft slope and the hard slope is the barrier to entry. And there's no barrier to entry on a soft slope. You just come in and, we're not going to pressure you, but look at all the beauty you could be a part of. Yeah. Now, that doesn't work so well in an individualistic society where everyone's told, basically, you can set your own interpretation of everything around you. That means you can move your own attention wherever you want, and that's going to determine the world. That's the postmodern, like it or not. That is the conclusion of postmodern thought. And Peterson's not saying no barrier. No, he's also not saying like you got to do 10 push-ups a day, and then like he's not David Goggins, right? And then get to 20 by the next week, and then all of a sudden you'll take control of your like. It's not all agency. It's not all agency, and it's not no agency. It's some agency, and that he doesn't couch it as sacrifice. He says, pick up the heaviest thing you can pick up your cross, and
drag it up that hill. What's at the top of the hill, Jordan? The kingdom of God.
Well, and he even says, it doesn't have to be the highest hill that you can see. It's the highest hill you can handle. So he's right in between these two modes of, just do whatever you feel like.
And I see what you're saying.
And no, see that mountain? Climb that mountain. Climb the whole thing. Now, do it. It's neither.
Actually, and this is what he's modulating it for. Actually, he has sort of framed it in a way to allow people to sort of self-modulate, which is what they do actually. And you want enough in there that it'll challenge them, but you don't want too much that will discourage them. And again, as a clinical psychologist, he worked that transaction for many, many people, because that's essentially what you do when you do discipleship, when you do parenting, when you do mentorship. Mm-hmm. You push them as hard as they can handle.
Yep.
And then, you get them some easy wins, and then you get them a harder win, and then they stumble and they get discouraged, but you encourage them and you pick them up and you keep them going up. The difficulty, part of the difficulty why I stepped into this space was I saw that, well, you're going to have a hard time doing this on YouTube because, you screw up and then it's off to, Mr. Beast.
Right. But I would argue if the church hadn't receded so far, they would be there to pick those people up already.
Well, I would say they still are.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, and they're not, but whatever.
No, they are. They are, not perfectly. We've among us, we've got plenty of people who are wandering into steep slope orthodoxy, and some of them go and they actually make it up the slope. Others wander in and they discover that maybe orthodoxy isn't quite right, so they go back to the church they grew up in. But others sort of stay in the twilight.
And far too many of them stay in the twilight. And so you can see what I'm talking about with no barrier versus a huge barrier. And the third way is that middle, and he's abstracted out that personal psychological self-help component that actually works and managed to get it to work at the group layer, right? He's managed to make it scale. Everybody talks about scale. Peterson is the master of scale in this case. He's taken that personal, like, I'm going to carry you through this. We're going to do this together. I'm going to lend you my agency, because you can't do that on YouTube. And he's found a way to get as close as you can. And to your point, it doesn't get you all the way there. But like, that doesn't matter, because you're thinking the gap is, we just need to get them into church. And I'm saying, no, we just need to get them to Peterson. And then we could get them, that they have to go through that middle step, especially if they're meaning crisis people. There's no way you're going to get a meaning crisis person directly into church. Because they'll just get confused by the language, and they don't have it. It's not the language either. It's the concepts. I mean, it's hard for me to explain this because it sounds absurd. They do not understand creation. They only believe that the world began when they became conscious personally. They actually don't understand you were born into a world. I've had probably hundreds of conversations with younger people in particular, but also with some older people who do not understand. And it takes hours and hours of my time, and sometimes Manuel and others, to get them to understand there was stuff here before you were born, and you were born into it, and you're benefiting from that. And also you have a duty. But because Peterson doesn't give you a no struggle entry into maps of meaning, right? It has a value. And that value is wrapped up in your agency. Like, you clean your room, right? And so there's a value. And he also gives you that framing, even if you don't do the past, present, and future offering, or any one of the three. He tells you about it. He says you can imagine what you want in 5 years or 3 years or 1 year, whatever it is, right? He gives you the options too, right? To your point, he gives you something you can handle. Maybe you can't handle 5 years, maybe you can handle 3, maybe you can handle 6 months. Do 6 months. And then he says, you can imagine what you want, but now you have to do this trade-off. I have a video on trade-offs, on navigating patterns, right? You have to do this trade-off. And the thing is, because there's a barrier and because he's giving you a framework, that's a powerful signal. And that's the key, which is ironically the topic of my Friday live stream this week on Navigating Patterns at 7 p.m. Eastern, is signals, right? Attention and signals. And that's what's drawing the attention. It's not waiting for people to engage sort of when they feel like it, and they just happen to wander by the church, and it's, providence hits, right? And there's nothing wrong with that. But he's saying, no, you could be better, or there's something wrong, or whatever, and which is good, right? Because on the one hand, if something's wrong, society has to change, and maybe they need to use different language when talking about you when you're not there, right? Or maybe we just need to pass some laws, right? Now he's saying, no, something's wrong, but you have agency, and you can clean your room. It's like, I don't have to rely on other people for that. Right. Appeals to the individualism, but also it's embedded in the world. And so he's kind of sneakily saying, yeah, but you're embedded in this world. Right. And that's the third way. He's not coming in and saying, you have an obligation because you were born into this world and God expects this from you. And that, he doesn't do that, obviously. Right. And he doesn't do the David Goggins thing. Like, you need to be a better person, so you need to climb that mountain right now with a rucksack with 50 pounds. He doesn't do that. Right. But he also doesn't just wait for them to wander on. Like, oh, welcome to my video. It's so nice to have you here. Would you like to talk about meaning and how you can map it in the world? No, he doesn't do that either. He talks about the limits of materialism. He uses the science, the materialism, to show the limits of materialism. And then he drags you in through history and says, look at this great other story and how much richer it is than the stories that have something to them that isn't material. And maybe there's something to it because it's been around quite a while, longer than any of us. And so that's the re-enchantment of the world, is reaching the limit of materialism, showing them that limit, and then saying, but there's other things going on, and the materialism doesn't quite get you there now, does it? And that's the third way, is not to refute any of the materialism. It's to take you all the way to the end of it and saying, well, where does this start? What is this third way? Yeah. And I think that's what's important. That's what I'm talking about with third wayism. It really isn't that winsome approach, and it really isn't that hardcore Goggins style, run a million miles or else sort of crazy talk, or the Andrew Tate sort of narrative, right?
No, it is different. It is different. I think, obviously for Peterson, a big part of this was he rode there was clearly a cultural frustration building with, as you said it, there was a lot of the cultural messages were ironically telling people they had no agency.
Yeah.
And the problems that they faced were the fault of societal spirits larger than themselves. I wouldn't say spirits. These are societal frameworks larger than yourself, and you're simply trapped in this, and you're hopeless. And that, of course, hit nihilism. And if you go all the way back in my channels, look at all of those randos conversations I had for the first year. One of the things that I saw immediately that there was basically nihilistic induced depression was pervasive. And this I think was, at least for many people, partly a result of this messaging that basically was just a little bit of Grizz's branding. There is no agency. We want what's best for you. And people at a very low level imbibed that. And that's why I called Peterson the unauthorized exorcist, because in a sense, it was like Gandalf coming up to Theoden and casting that out and telling these young men, you do have agency, and your miserable life is the result of this stuff that you've bought. It's time to wake up, to shake it off, and to do something with your miserable little life. And of course, Peterson brought with him a ton of really interesting motivational campiness. Now, and this is still working. I mean, his subscriber numbers continue to go up. New people continue to find the channel, et cetera, et cetera. He still continues to be an exorcist. And I think in many ways, part of the reason that the church has benefited from this is because once people were freed, they could then take next steps. And unlike what people say or imagine, even though in churches you do have a savior, that savior and his spirit inhabits you, and in fact you are called to take up that cross and follow. So Christianity has long both had a complex worldview where there are powers and principalities that bind, and also you have agency, and you are called to actually do the impossible and die on the way. But good news is there is a resurrection. So, Mark, the question is, what's it going to take to get Mark LeFevre in church?
This is where you guys fail, because you go after the individual and in an age. So I want to liken this to
wait. This is where you guys fail. I'm not talking about lots of people. We're talking about you, Mark.
I know. I'm weaseling out of that on purpose, and I will continue to do so. I mean, you can continue to try. I don't care, but it's not going to work. Well, and there's important reasons.
Why don't you go to church, Mark?
Well, look, there's important reasons for that. So let me explain to you what I think is going on first, right?
I want to know about you. I don't want to know about what's going on.
It's not going to work, Paul. I'm not going to break. Father Eric spent a week at my house, man. He couldn't break it either. So, and I finally went into we have a Basilica in Columbia, South Carolina, for some reason.
He was creeping into your bedroom every night and, putting holy water on your head, hoping, maybe we can.
No, but he was doing mass in my living room every day, pretty much, except when we went to the church, to the Basilica, the Basilica is gorgeous. Outside, it's nothing remarkable. Inside, it's beautiful. I'm like, oh, good job, guys. Hide all the beauty. That'll really draw the crowds. They can't even see how it's gorgeous inside. It's much more gorgeous inside than I could have imagined. So, but that's the problem. Peterson somehow intuits, I would imagine, I can't imagine he's doing this consciously, that there's a difference between, and it's Monsignor Shea that Eric introduced me, Father Eric introduced me to, right? Christendom and apostolic mission. There's a difference between those two things. And we should switch modes. In Christendom, yeah, you can save individual souls because they're embedded in all this Christianity everywhere, right? You're swimming in it. And, Tom Holland Dominion kind of backs that up. But really, I think it's receded too far. And now you have to tell the individual, because they have a deep fear of everything around them, blowing up or decaying or attacking, or however you want to frame it. You have to tell them how they can contribute to that, along with their own salvation, if you want to put it that way.
No,
and that's what Peterson does.
Yeah. And I agree with you 100%. And some people will listen to this and they do come to Living Stones and they'll say, Pastor Paul hasn't given me a job yet. But, pastors have all these Jedi tricks. And one of the tricks is give someone a job in church, because once they have a job, the truth is, just like you noted, well, now suddenly, I have to go to church because if I don't go to church and do this thing isn't going to happen. And then because they need agency within the body. Right. And once they have agency in the body, then suddenly things they begin to take on the mission, and they'll have plenty of questions and doubts and all of that kind of stuff. But once they participate and once they feel a part of it, then suddenly things start going in another direction. And I really liked earlier, and I think you're exactly right, that the meaning crisis and the crisis of faith are two very different things. And I think part of where this gets super complex, because there are a lot of, working through Tom Holland's thesis is really interesting, because basically what he says is that there are, in fact, a lot of Christians out there who are saying they're not. And and part of the reason is for the church, but the relationship between church and society continues to sort of morph and change. And of course, in Catholic history, even any close reading of history knows that even in societies that we would look back now and say these were deeply Christendom societies, only a portion of the people would actually participate in church. And, even in, let's say, New England Puritans, that was New England Puritans, these people were athletes for Jesus. They demanded a lot of themselves and they demanded a lot of their neighbors. And, you had whole societies where if you don't go to church, you could be in trouble with the constable. So what's true is that part of what we're dealing with is these fuzzy lines, that the boundaries are not anywhere near as obvious as we think they are. And what churches try to do basically is help people get in and participate. And actually, part of what I've tried to do in this little corner, and by the virtue that we're talking on this live stream, I'm succeeding, is that I've actually managed to lure Mark LeFevre into a place where he does live streams with a Protestant minister, and he lives with a Roman Catholic priest in his house who's secretly sneaking into his bedroom and sprinkling holy water on him at night. And Mark doesn't even know it. Eric sent me the email because Father Eric and I have been collaborating. And I'm getting into the house, Paul, and he's been anointing your doorways and slipping little things into your coffee in the morning. So beware, Mark, we're after you.
I don't drink coffee, but yeah. Well, look, too far, Paul. You almost had it. You didn't mention you said, if you had said tea, you'd have been right there. But shucks. One slip. It only takes one slip.
Father Eric. We'll get him yet.
I already believe you're manipulating me behind the scenes after that whole week with the Billy Graham library. That was so freaky. You have no idea how freaky all the things that were going on right around the same time were.
But I think that also bears in with, another piece that we talked about in terms of your middle out, that people have within them deep presuppositions that they are unaware of, that that the rest of their life is built on. And what happens with conversions is that it's sort of like the iceberg flipping over every now and then. It's suddenly there's a massive thing. But even with an iceberg flip, at the end of the flip, you still have 90% underwater and 10% on top, but it's a different 10%.
10%, right.
And what happens in a culture, that cognitive cultural grammar, those are really fancy Vervaeke words, but is that people are deeply impacted by these religious stories that have been alive in the culture for a very long time, whether or not they know the stories or not. And what happens is that all of this stuff is impacting them. Part of the challenge, though, since the 20th century has been there are lots of other stories too that are forming people. And whereas in many places, traditional religions were sort of the only game in town, or at least the strongest game in town, now suddenly you're competing with streaming TV, and a lot is forming people, and that's then a real challenge for churches.
Well, yeah, and one of the things we I know we did that wonderful conversation with Joey and Father Eric.
Yeah,
right?
that was a great conversation.
That was really good. You guys should check that out.
Did you post it on Navigating Patterns?
I did not post it on Navigating
It's
Patterns.
on my channel. It's a little known channel. It's the name that's right down here on the screen. You can find it there. I don't even remember what we entitled it, but Jordan Peterson watched that conversation.
That's
and he really liked it. And he really liked it.
Well, you should watch more of my stuff. And then
you hear that, Jordan? Navigating Patterns. And T Grizz and Tweety Bird, for those of you who watch the Freddie and Paul show, you too.
And then I got a lot out of that talk, especially because Joey was just on fire for some reason. And I feel very blessed that worked out as well as it did from my perspective. And then in the talk I did with Father Eric on his channel, he said he really summarized, sort of a summary of what we talked about when he was physically with me for the week, right? But he said something interesting. He said, the way he phrased it was better than the way I would have phrased it, obviously. He said, we as a church, we need to build community outside the church so we have a community to draw from into the church. And that is some of what Peterson's doing when he's restoring your agency. He's saying, you can clean your room and you can help out your family, right? And now you know how to do those things. You have some grounding, right? Some historical grounding, like, oh, I have a history of being able to clean my room at least once. And I have a history of understanding that I have some control over what future I have. It may be limited, but it's not zero. And anything's better than, because zero is nihilism. It's the same thing, right? The minute you have no agency, it may take a while, but you're going to get to nihilism. And that's part of what he's sort of drawing you forth, right? From is away from zero. He says it, right? Zero is a funny number. Oh, yes. Zero is a funny number. And that to me is part of his cultural cognitive grammar sort of framing that he's using to help people out. And then once you have somebody who knows how to behave in a community again, and look, we've lost that due to some fake news virus scam that happened where we locked everybody away and said social distancing, which is not a thing that that's just a hard no. Physical distancing, maybe. Social distancing is garbage, right? And so we've lost some of those skills because you use it or lose it. And more in some parts of the country than others. Like down here, I was just looking. I was at the beach 3 years ago because they had opened up a beach in South Carolina, and I was like, "All right, we're driving 3 hours."
You don't look like you go to the beach very often, Mark. You're about as pasty as I am.
Ha! No. I go to the beach. I had the top down the whole way. It was
you just wear sunscreen.
I don't wear sunscreen. I do not.
You wear a hat.
I do sometimes wear the hat. Well, if I don't, I can get
you got to wear the hat, man. Because I'll tell you, out here in California, dudes without hair like us, by the time they get to be 70, 80 years old, their skin is.
You're in Northern California, man. You should try. When you get southern in the United States, that sun gets a lot worse.
I know. Well, you got humidity down there anyway. So
yeah, it's nasty. But
all right.
you can see that cultural sort of framework breaking down. The church has nothing to draw from. And now it does because Peterson's giving them agency. And that's the third way, inviting people to a small barrier to entry, right? And sneakily telling them, oh, look, you can carry something and that would be cool. And then they do.
All right, good. Okay, so I got a half hour left and then I got to meet with Vendonk and Catherine because we're putting stuff together. So if there's any questions anyone wants to put in, or if anybody wants to jump in the chat,
jump in, that'd be great.
Tell us that it's.
Tell us what we're getting wrong, or what's not clear, or why we're wrong.
Nothing's clear, Mark. Nothing's
whatever.
Clear. Everything.
Nothing's clear with me. I've noticed that. I'm like, what? You guys, are you not listening? And that was great, by the way. That clip that you put in that I don't think John liked very much. That clip of me that you put in with your video there was great, though. The Lonely Lives in Bedroom video was fantastic.
Oh,
well done.
No. All right. All right. Here's a question for you. When can I come and hang out at Mark's house? Casey wants to know.
Anytime. Casey knows. Casey was on my Discord earlier today. We were
Casey's a
chatting
great
most of the
guy.
day.
You have your own Discord?
I do.
Uh-oh.
The
Uh-oh.
Mark of Wisdom Discord. All right.
You should feel hunted now.
Let's do
Look,
it, Father
you are
Eric.
surrounded.
Get him.
I just want everybody to know that I did not go into his room when he was sleeping.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, I was like, really, Paul? Really?
That's
is not. No, it's not good.
Spent a week, yes. Said mass in his living room, yes. Intense conversations, yes. We had our own bedrooms, so
Opposite sides of the house and everything, with doors, or at least eventually, because Father Eric helped me put a door on the back room, so it was great.
So what do you think? What do you think of the conversation, Mark or Eric? I thought Mark made some good points. I thought it was well worth listening to. So
yeah, it's a lot of stuff that I've been working with him on.
This is the only bald stream. Haired men need not apply.
And I'm grateful that you took the time, because now Mark will stop whining about the fact that you owe him a conversation. So
no, he's going to come up with another conversation that I owe him. Oh, how have you been doing, Father Eric?
doing all right.
How on earth do you do that on Sunday evenings? I just think, oh, that's the last thing I would want to do on a Sunday evening.
Well, the thing is I don't talk that much.
Oh, that's right. I'm a Protestant. I talk all Sunday morning.
No. I'm talking about on my stream,
Oh.
Like
if you have Mark on, you don't have to talk a lot.
Right. So I've always got that. I've always got that.
Shut up.
And then I've got, just a real menagerie of people who just kind of show up, and I just kind of set the stage. I maybe direct the conversation a little bit, but otherwise, I just like oftentimes it's Ted and Mark going back and forth, and it's delightful just to sit there and listen to those guys, because so it's a little easier than you think, maybe. But I also have maybe a dozen people watching. So it's a little less pressure than the 88 that we have right now.
I feel zero pressure. 90 people, that's not a lot of people. What do you think of, I'm kind of curious about this, Father Eric, now that we have you here. Like, I'm very familiar with Protestant style evangelism. What would you say sort of is the Roman Catholic style of evangelism these days?
Well, that's the problem. Is we don't know what we're doing. We don't have any way to welcome people in. It's not working. So you hear lots of people making noise about the new evangelization, and very few people have any idea what it is. So that's and you're talking with gigantic institution moving very slowly. It's going to take a while before we have a saint raised up that shows us the way, and then we can all follow after him.
Yeah, I'd say that makes sense. Well, and I guess a lot of it, and this is true for Protestants too, a lot of it has tended to be trying to activate nominal people in the environment. And usually it's sort of, just like I mentioned before, even in places like France, where deeply Roman Catholic, I mean, church attendance numbers, throughout history, up and down. The church is just always sort of there for when sort of the Spirit runs through and suddenly a whole bunch more people get active. And then, I mean, this is a pretty normal pattern in human history with respect to church participation.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Well, but I don't think it's a participation issue. Like I said, the meaning crisis particularly is not merely a participation issue. There's something deeper down there. And you sort of touched on it, Paul, earlier when you were talking about the competition right? When we don't recognize, what I like to say is, if you believe you do not have a religion, one will be provided to you without your knowledge or consent. When we don't recognize that fact, that religion is all about these patterns, you might call them perennial patterns because they're not problems, because you can't solve them, right? When you have to deal with those, they're there, they're part of reality. And then how you deal with those seems to just sort of follow certain methods, right? Certain ways. And that looks a lot like the ways that the church, except it's disconnected. It's not in a larger framework because you're not looking up and you're not striving for that. You're looking across the world. It's a flat world, right? You're just kind of looking across. You're seeing a sea of people. There's signals everywhere. They're all roughly equal, except for the really loud people who are screaming at the sky in the middle of the city, right? And you're like, oh, well, maybe I should pay attention to them, right? But your attention should be upwards. And that's what I'm going to talk about on Friday, again, on my live stream, 7 p.m. Eastern.
Right. We got to give Manuel a little time in here.
Well, I get.
You got to shave your head, though.
No, that's not gonna happen.
Take him off.
I got a girlfriend. She wants long hair. So
Well,
sorry, ladies.
for the girlfriend, we'll let you keep it.
But yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit about. Well, Fakey goes into this AI talk, and we're going to talk about the AI talk as well. So that's
okay.
Tomorrow probably. Anyway, for Fakey, when he's talking about the AI talk, he's talking about you have a problem and you create a solution, and then you get this overhead thing, right?
We've got some noise coming in the channel. Anybody know where that's from?
I can't tell. Not from me.
I don't think it's from any of us.
Anyway. So it's a problem where the overhead becomes too heavy, right? And then it collapses under its own weight. And I think when you do life hacks, right, you get into the same problem, right? You just create a system that's too complex and you can't manage things. And also because you're patching things, you don't recognize the reason why a thing is there, right? You don't have a way to evaluate whether what's there is actually still fulfilling the function or not, right? And then your relevance realization is completely off because you don't have a way to judge the relevance of the things that you're doing. You're just doing the things because you think they're right? And now you're stuck in legalism.
Okay.
That's
Examples are your friend, Manuel. You're going to have to get a little more concrete for us.
Well, so for example, if I learn that I have to close the door, right, and then I become OCD about closing every door, like maybe I don't need to close the door if I go back out within 20 seconds, right? And if I keep closing the door, now I'm frustrating. When I'm in a rush, I'm frustrating myself in being in a rush, and I can't organize things towards the higher principle, which is getting there on time, for example, because I have to go through the checklist of all the rules that I make, right? So I make this complex set of rules, maybe with the cooking, right? Like, oh, we gotta wash the thing first because, but like sometimes things don't need washing, right? Like why do you do the washing? And like what do we get? We get this whole list of things where, like, you should be doing this way, you should be doing this that way, right? Like that's what science provides us. And we're just like overwhelmed by it, and we don't have a way to discern the relevant things from the irrelevant things, right? So now if we go back to this third way, like what this third way requires, because these are all really lost people, right? Like when we're talking about 6 months into the future, that's too much for some people, right? Like some people can't even look one day into the future. And like I've been in that place. Like I couldn't plan a day into the future. So when you're there, like what do you need? Well, you need something you can do, right? So that's completely individual, right? So the path that you need to walk, because like you can't see the path, right? Because like I'm smart and I was there, I couldn't see the path. Like there was a way that I couldn't relate to things that like I was blind. And so you need someone to provide you the path, right? And then when you're in the movement, you can use the momentum of the movement at a certain point to propel yourself forward. But like to get into the movement, you need constant guidance of people. So when we're talking about this third wayism, like it's not enough to show up every Sunday at church, even if you would go, because that's never going to happen anyway. Like you're not going to go. Like there needs to be so many things that happen, and then Mark was talking about this materialism, right? Like this materialism is effectively reducing the complexity of the world to the things that you can see, right? Like if I see it, I'll believe it, right? And if I can't make the connections in my head, I'm just saying it's an illusion. That's
well, it's a subtle, and Manuel, I mean, those who've been around this little corner for a while know that, I mean, you've had your own personal journey in this space too.
Mhm.
And I think both Father and Eric and I would agree that showing up to a meeting once a week for many people is insufficient for a lot of transformation. Wouldn't you agree, Father Eric? Now, the Roman Catholics, in a sense, have a little bit of advantage because there are a lot of Catholic churches that have daily mass, and I think for a lot of people, that's a tremendous thing. And it's also tremendous because, I mean, allow me a little bit of Roman Catholic envy, if you will. They've got beautiful spaces. Our spaces tend to be toned down. They have traditions with daily and hours. And part of what's happened with a lot of Protestants isn't the Protestants have sort of been, borrowing from Roman Catholics certain traditions, but it's a rather, I mean, even your own story, Manuel, it's a rather mysterious thing. I don't think any of us could have said when we first met you, oh, this is what you need. It's actually sort of people together beginning to put things. No, am I wrong?
Well, like this might be a hindsight bias, but I think I can, and I can for other people as well. So like I'm just disagree. Like I'm saying that you couldn't have seen it, right? Like I totally believe that, but like there's a way to see that.
Well, I would say that maybe you should call Matthew McConaughey and get on his channel. And, my point being, demonstrate it, continue to demonstrate it with people around you.
Yeah.
Because if you demonstrate real ability to help get people unstuck, just sort of with the mousetrap thing, people will beat a path to your door.
Yeah, well, and also, Paul,
I'm not saying that to put you down or to be skeptical. It's just tremendously difficult.
I've done it with plenty of people already. Like,
yeah,
like that's not true. Like what you
Yeah.
say, it's
Good.
not true.
Good.
But I want to mention this because it is in my notes, and I sort of skipped over it. Well, one of the things that Peterson does is he doesn't give you anything. He's just laying out your path, right? And laying out a path, whatever path that is.
He doesn't give you anything. I mean, this is a really abstract thing. What do you mean by that phrase?
Okay. He doesn't offer you a map of meaning. He just says they exist. He doesn't say, well, when you clean your room, all this stuff is going to happen. He's not offering you a solution to a problem. He's saying, you know what? There's this, and you could try this. And at the same time, he's also investing you emotionally, right? I mean, crying aside, although that's a factor, he's showing you his engagement because, and I'm going to go over this in my live stream on Friday, right? The signal of doing things in the world and exemplifying things people talk about all the time. Oh, you know what? The IDW did, they exemplified a good conversation. And I have my doubts about that, but it's true in a way, right? Because there was no fighting and arguing and debate mode stuff. Fair enough. But that's part of the key is that when you're exemplifying, we'll say, the good church life or the good Christian life, however you want to frame that, that is a powerful signal that comes in unconsciously. And Peterson doesn't do that. And yet he does something very similar that gets you to that point where you can then engage with all of this. And that's the whole thing. Oh, yeah, there's Ethan. Sure.
There you go.
He's got his cred. And it is about, like, I still hold to what I said in our first conversation, Paul, was at least 2 years ago now, right?
At least.
Yeah. If you want to understand Peterson, you need Vervaeke's framework. It's not optional. But when you have Vervaeke's framework, his science of meaning, now you can go and build tools, not only so that you can see where people are stuck, which is what Manuel's claiming, and I have to back up that claim because I'm making the same claim, right? And it's not universal and whatever, like the solutions suck. They're just the best that we have, right? Then you can build tools to get them unstuck. And those tools are all similar to Peterson's tools in some ways and different in others, right? But you need all that framework. And most of that framework is actually on navigating patterns because I have the models there.
So what do you two need to build to help more people and help people find you with this?
Well, we need to train people because, like, I think it's all in the participation, right? Like, I think Father Eric has experienced us talking to people, and it is an individual approach. Like, I'm not kidding, right? Like the road is 1,000 steps, and you need.
No, I no argument here that it's an individualist approach. You won't. I don't think anybody doing ministry will argue with that.
It's two-pronged as well. Like, one of the things we need is a place for people, right? So you need, like, not just so Peugeot does a great job with the website, right? We need a good website to help people to have a place to be online. And then we need events, whether it's Thunder Bay, right? Or whether it's bigger things. In other words, retreats a la Rafe Kelly, right? We need all of those components. And at the same time, I'd like to start sort of this idea of the wisdom communities where you can get with people. It would sort of, to some extent, Paul, be my competition with Estuary, although there's no competition there because you guys should do what you're doing, right? So
I'm not trying to compete with anybody here. I'm just trying to offer something to help.
Nor am I. I'm just saying, there's a different way to do something like what you're doing with Estuary that I have outlined.
Yeah. Well, Eric asked, do you think some of these people you're talking about want a spiritual battle to fight, not just a spiritual home?
But here's the problem. You can't say spiritual to them. They don't know what that means. True. Like they use the word, but they don't have the concept behind the word. They just use the word when materialism fails.
And that's going to be a real challenge at our event in May, is at least having some degree of clarity in the conversation about that word, because that's one of the fudgiest words we have.
Well, I think it's actually this enlightened something for me, because what is a battle, right? It's a having mode. It's you applying your agency to get something. And what is a home? Home is a place that you come to rest, right? Like a place where you let things come over you and where you let go of trying to control things. And I think people don't know what it is to have a home, right? I think Vervaeke is completely right about this domicile stuff. Like people don't have a home. They don't know how to recognize a home if they would be in it, because it would be scary. Like, it would be scary for them. Like we have to realize that if you move into a place that you're not familiar and you're suspicious, which is almost everybody, right? We're in the hermeneutics of suspicion. It's you don't want to be there. You want to run away, and you want to solve it with trust, right? Like, if we get people to trust each other, that we can have good conversations. No, like people need to be willingly to be facing their frustrations. Like they need to engage with these things voluntarily and with faith, not with trust. Like they need to believe that if they get to the other side, that things will open up for them.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point.
Well, I want to make the point too, because, to give John Vervaeke some credit in his AI talk, which otherwise I just can't even, he mentioned a couple of really important things. One of them was hierarchy avoids infinite regress. Yes, it does. How interesting. So that helps fight the domicide, because the domicide is you're in an infinite regress. You don't have a home. You don't have a place to rest. And also religion gives us a way to contextualize the world where we are not at the top of the hierarchy. Yes. And we always need that. That's why religion's inevitable. That goes back to if you don't have a religion, one will be provided to you without your knowledge or consent. And so we're always looking for that, because domicide is the problem, whether it be spiritual domicide Or, John mentions it, after Alexander comes through, domicide everywhere, right? A physical domicide. It doesn't really matter at some point.
David says, I've been in this corner for almost 4 years almost and never once watched a full Vervaeke video unless Peugeot was in it. And I'm not trying to, dog on Vervaeke at all or anything, but I do want to get at this question of one of the things, if you listen to Peugeot in the Exodus seminar, one of the things I think Jonathan gets very right is people really struggle with abstractions.
Yes.
And I think this, again, is part of the reason we see some of the advantages of sacramental and more symbolic Christian traditions like Catholicism and Orthodoxy, because people are so funny in that they act things out. And Peterson actually lays this out in his first biblical series thing. You act things out long before you can actually talk about it. And of course, psychologists will know this because they sit in a room and they're in there for hours getting someone to actually articulate what they're acting out. Yeah, it's at some point it gets to a position where, okay, if you can articulate it, maybe you can have a little bit more agency over the acting, but that's not a foregone conclusion. Father Eric hasn't said enough, and Father Eric is a really smart man, so I want to get Father Eric a few more words in here. Maybe he doesn't want to talk.
Yeah, maybe I'm smart enough to stay silent. I don't know.
But I think that's a piece of it, and I think part of it's been very interesting because I know that there are some people who, in terms of this little corner, there's big Peugeot fans, and Vanderklay they can take or leave because he's one of these Protestants and they're the source of all these world problems. And Vervaeke, he's not even a Christian, and so don't know about him. But there are other people for whom, John Vervaeke is a super helpful person,
right? That
has helped them, unlock some of this stuff. And part of what early on I saw was, Iron Root was there in the basement of the Bridges of Meaning Discord, but over at, going over there to Awakening from the Meaning Crisis proved really helpful. So
yeah,
I think I like the combination of the actors in this corner, because I think it actually sort of spreads out the people that we can talk to.
But we had action. We had the meditation series, and the problem with John's work, and I had a conversation last night with a bunch of people who watched that AI talk. It's way up here. I mean, even for me, I was like, really? Like, this is like, I got to really listen, right? And the problem is, every once in a while, he drops a gem. I mean, talking about nostalgia as a perennial pattern, he didn't use that word, right? With no solution is genius. Talking about religions the way we understand our relationship to hierarchy is absolute genius. The rest of it is so over everyone else's head, sometimes including mine, that you can't get it, and people don't understand that. Like, they don't. So today was very much, I got to remember to ping Vanderklay about this talk, right? And then I ping you and you're like, let's do it today. And I was like, I don't have my notes ready. Like, I know what I'm thinking, but I don't even know well enough to use my distributed cognition, because like, this is not me. Like, I use a bunch of people like Manuel in particular, right? Like Father Eric, a bunch of people, to be able to articulate stuff. Sally Joe's invaluable. She just drops these little gems every once in a while when she kind of sees something. And then all of a sudden, I'm sitting there furiously taking notes, because I'm like, I don't have enough time to take all the notes and watch all the videos I need to watch now, because Paul wants to do this today, and I'm not passing up the chance.
I thought you did well, Mark. I thought you did well.
Words, I think.
What's
Too
that?
much jargon, and just, I don't know. Is it just therapy?
What do you mean, Claire?
I listen to what you talk about, but there seems to be a terror of really saying what you mean. I think it's unhealthy.
Unhealthy? That's a pretty strong thing.
A terror of saying what you mean from which of these people? Because no,
all of you.
Definitely not.
Oh, well, then why would you stay?
What?
Then why would you stay?
because I'm watching this. It's self-therapy, isn't it? All this sort of endless talking and not really saying what you mean.
Well, I don't think it's not really, because not really saying what you mean sort of says, I know what I mean and I can say it, but I won't. And my channel is definitely self-therapy. All the talking and talking and talking I'm looking for language. I'm looking for conversation partners. I completely agree with you that just talk is just talk, but talk is a pretty important thing.
Don't you run
Oh,
a
I know.
church
I was
as well?
watching Jordan Peterson in I think it was Ephesus. I don't know if you saw that. You know,
Yep.
this very
Yep.
grand ancient building, and the language he was using, it was all, you know, all the abstractions that people were complaining about. And I think all we want is to listen to a good sermon, an inspirational sermon. But there are so many things that we can't even talk about anymore, such as who is a man and who is a woman, and why can't we talk about it anymore?
One of the funny things about the complaint that we can't talk about it anymore is I hear a lot of talking about it.
But not directly. I think the other week
Not in
somebody
certain
was saying
spaces. I think we're dealing with hierarchies.
well, we always deal with hierarchies, I think, but it's almost as if, well, you know, with certain hierarchies you can't say things directly, and I think it's poisonous not being able to say what you mean and take a long time to say it, because then people get bored or they get confused and they walk away and nothing is done and nothing is expressed.
And
So I can give you my experience. I always say exactly what I mean. And if you don't get it, that means that there's a communication problem, but it doesn't mean that I don't say what I mean.
anyway,
Okay, I like to say that applies to me as well. But there are a few people who don't say what they mean, and I mean I've been to other, you know, streams where they do say what they mean, and I don't know. I mean, if you don't really say what you mean, then your issues don't get dealt with, do they?
Yeah. I think a lot of what we do is we fumble. People try, we fumble, we reach for words, we try to improve, we do what we can, and yeah. But I promise to close this because I've got another appointment coming up. But big thanks to Mark LeFevre for sharing your ideas, and you know, as you said, Mark, I gathered you know, I gathered a lot from this, and I have a better understanding of what you're going at. And Manuel, I still owe you. Maybe after this we'll find a time that I can be on your channel. And Father Eric, always a pleasure. And Claire, thank you for jumping on and sharing. And thank all of you for watching.
Thank
See
you,
you in
Paul.
California, Paul.
Thank you.
All right.
Right.